All right. Well, welcome anybody who's joining us. We'll get started in just a moment. As we've been doing over the last few weeks, we want to just give everyone a second or two to get settled in. I am Robin Anselmi of Conversant. I'm joined by Mickey Connolly, our dear friend Jim Reinhart, and Emma Rose Connolly today. We'll do introductions in just a second. This is the last in a 8-part series, 7-part series. I've actually lost count all of a sudden. That we've been 9, thanks Emrose, that we've been doing throughout the COVID-19 crisis. We're thrilled to have everybody be joining us today. This one will be the last one in this series. We're going to take a brief pause and then we'll start again next month, in the next month or so. We'll say more about that at the end of today. So today we're going to be talking about surprising results. And again, we're joined by our friend Jim Reinhart, the CEO of Ygrene. We'll get him to introduce himself in just a second. Mickey Connolly and Emma Rose Connolly. Emma Rose is going to be monitoring the chat for us. As people are joining, Emma Rose, you want to say a little bit about the chat?
Sure thing. Yeah, so everybody, I would suggest changing the setting on your chat to all panelists and attendees instead of just all panelists so that everybody can hear your lovely thoughts and see what your questions are. I'll be monitoring the chat just to make sure that all the questions that get asked and are connected to our theme will get answered and brought into the conversation. So please feel free to engage there and I'll loop everybody in on the panelist side.
Great, thanks. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. So today is called Surprising Results. I think a good place to start is, what the heck do we mean by that? So surprising and results is an interesting combination of words. Mickey, what do we mean when we say surprising and results together?
Well, as obviously you know, and Jim knows, one of our books is called The Vitality Imperative. And in there, we were really looking at what are the things that allow organizations and people to produce bigger results with less time, money, and stress. And one of the factors we saw is that when people produce more than they thought they could, that the whole energy of the system goes up. And people then are able to produce even more than that. So the question for us became, well, is that something just to be happy about when it happens? Or is there a design to surprising results? And that's where our research went, and that's where the writing in the book's about. And that's one of the things that I know that Jim feels very strongly about, is there is a design. You can cause surprising results. It's not just a happy accident.
Yeah. Jim, when you think about that combination of surprise and results, anything that you would add to what Mickey just said, that what for you actually leads to the surprise?
Well, first I'd add to the definition, which I think is fabulous. Anybody who knows me knows that I love to see the charts go up and to the right and the numbers to get bigger, etc. But to me, I really know we've got a surprising result when the people who actually created them feel more fulfilled. And by that, not only fulfilled in what they've done, but what the team has done, but also they start to see new possibilities because of that fulfillment. Something triggers and happens. They get through that inflection point where things, to Mickey's, what he said, seemed hard, now seem easier. And I'm not going to go and say surprising results or greatness is easy, but there is a design that can make it easier to achieve and make more things possible than folks maybe thought at the beginning. And I look forward to chatting some more about what that design is.
That's great. Jim, we know who the heck you are, but some of our friends and colleagues who are joining us here today might not. Will you say a little bit about who Ygrene is and anything else you want to say about how you're connected to us and Conversant?
Yes, so Ygrene is energy spelt backwards, so that's an interesting little factoid unto itself. But what we do is help people actually make their homes safer, more secure, and more energy efficient. Our purpose is to actually improve the environment, improve communities, by helping individual homeowners, small businesses, et cetera, get access to money to help make their homes and businesses, again, more energy efficient, safer, and more secure, protect them from things like hurricanes or earthquakes or wildfires. We're starting to expand across the nation, but today operate mostly in California and Florida and Missouri. and excited to be with you guys. Mickey was pointing out as we've gotten here that I've been connected to Conversant almost as long as Emma Rose has been around. So since in the mid-90s, Conversant was a big part of my journey and helping me see what was possible, not only for my companies I've worked with and for partners and customers, et cetera, but for me personally, it was a big part of my journey from frontline management up to senior management. And it's been a pleasure to know you guys and have you along that 20+ year journey with me.
Thanks, Jim. And you're joining us today from Richmond, Virginia, I believe.
Yes, somehow I found myself quarantined here in this little tiny cubicle with the rest of everybody. But glad to be here with my family. I've got 2 college students that are home, and I've enjoyed the time. We'll see if they have at the end of this thing, but so far so good.
Really great. Thanks, Jim. And thanks again for joining us here today. So superficially, from an outsider's perspective, all the things you just said about Ygrene, I might make a case that this has been a particularly challenging time for your business in the midst of COVID-19. I know from the conversation we had the other day, parts of that are true and parts of that might not be fully true. Will you say a little bit about, particularly relative to surprising results, what you've been noticing at Ygrene over the last few months?
Well, I think everybody is having their own business challenges during this time. And while there are a few businesses like online grocery delivery that probably are thriving, that's not the case for most businesses. And Ygrene has definitely not been immune to the challenges that are going on. In particular, our industry is not. Home improvement, as you can imagine, is difficult to do when people don't either think they're going to have money, or 2, they don't want to have contractors come visit them or work at their houses. So in general, the industry has been challenged, and a lot of our competitors have actually gone out of business, stopped doing business, shrunk pretty dramatically, greater than 50%. But at Ygrene, compared to where we were before COVID-19 became a common household phrase, is we're actually up 50%, and it looks like we may actually be up another 10% this week. So it's actually been amazing, and the team, I give them all the credit, has really rallied around this time and not only made Ygrene, but made a lot of homeowners and property owners better during this time.
So for you, and then Mickey, I'll be interested on your point of view about this, but Jim, for you, we said earlier there is a design to that surprise. Are there any elements inside of what you guys have been experiencing that you would explain in a way that actually other people could replicate? So are there any elements of design inside of what you've been noticing that we should all be paying attention to?
Yeah, I'll go with a simple phrase, but I'll give you 3 kind of examples to back it up. The simple phrase, which I learned in this book called The Vitality Imperative that I think Mickey mentioned, is the quality of connection really matters in this design. And we've been working hard at Ygrene before COVID-19 on 3 important quality of connections. The first has been amongst our team inside. The second has been how we connect with folks outside of Ygrene. And the third has been how we really connect to information, data, facts that really set the context for us. And I'll just go a high level here and then obviously see what Mickey would love to add, and then we can go deeper on any points. With regards to the internal side, we really had been running fairly well individual functional silos that all kind of did their same thing. But we didn't really have that multiplier effect of working across those silos. And so we flipped about 6 months ago to what we call core teams, made up of 5 to 10 people that are from those cross-functional areas that really now saw a shared purpose of how they were going to work together to deliver one goal versus each of their functional goals. The second thing is connection with external. And we really said our key to growth is connection with our customers and also other stakeholders. And we do have 2 customers, both our property owners, our homeowners, as well as the contractors that do that work, and then suppliers, et cetera, as well. And we really shifted towards that was going to be our key to our growth, was our quality of connection with those customers. And then the third thing was we really shifted to radical transparency around information and data. The P&L used to just be understood by the CFO, and people didn't even know their budgets candidly, and we weren't great at measuring and sharing metrics and what we saw about those metrics. And we're really making a shift towards a data-driven organization, particularly in the area of customer and how do we actually figure out how to make money correctly.
Mickey, for you, out of that, when we think about the quality of connection, and it's interesting because we often talk about I think people think about the quality of connection in terms of to people, and Jim's really talking about internally, externally, and to data. What for you jumps out as being important and critical in the design and in the thinking about surprising results relative to connection and the quality of the connections?
Well, the starting place for us is how well does information move across boundaries to make the whole system smarter? And I think, Jim, that's something that you've cared about for decades. It's something that you naturally do. You want information easily available to anybody who's an associate in the system. So I think that's a precursor condition for surprising results. Because the people who play too much the card of need to know and holding information scarce, they don't get surprising contributions because they don't have surprising people seeing new information and reacting to it. So I think what you're doing is one of the ingredients that are necessary. You want to keep diverse populations connected to information so that they have surprising insights that others don't have. I also think that the way you unleash, Jim, what you do by managing that overall well-connected system is by getting people focused on really big, significant challenges. Because that's a big part of this. So we say, what's a big, important question we don't yet know the answer to? And I know you've got another story about that. I'd love for you to go through, because I think to unleash the power of the connection, you got to get people focused on something in common and then make sure that the focus is big enough to unleash innovation. So you want to go to that story?
Yeah, I'd love to, because I think that's very true, right? You've got to create this possibility that candidly scares people probably a little bit at first. And I saw Jim Matroni, who we love as well, asked a good question. How do you start to get people engaged in this? And I think another part of seeing these bigger possibilities is actually start by having some little quick wins and some success. And the story I'd love to tell, because I think it talks about how the design not only creates possibilities today, but also for the future, is I went to Capital One kind of as it was really starting to come a real company and be known out there in the space. And when I got there, they really had a mindset that they were the best at everything, and therefore everything needed to be insourced, and we were to distrust our suppliers and our partners, etc. And I started really super small by just dealing with our COO, who was upset at how long it took us to approve invoices and how he had to get personally involved. And I took a 14-step crazy process and turned it into a 3-step process and just made that better for him. So the team then said, okay, well, maybe we actually can do something bigger. And we started to talk about how we could work with suppliers differently, supply chains differently. And lo and behold, we got up to the point where we said, hey, we spend a lot of money on postage. We're actually the biggest direct mailer in the world. And this thing is costing us over $300 million a year. Could we do something about that? And lo and behold, we had a lot of people who said no and were about what they were against. Let's not waste our time. I've got more important things to talk about. But we really had a conversation one day about what we were for and what the post office might be for. And guess what? We read what the Postmaster General's strategy was and what Capital One's strategy was. And 4 out of the 5 things were actually the same. And so we actually went and talked with the Postmaster General, and he said, I'd actually be interested in doing something with you guys. And out of that conversation, we actually did the first ever negotiated agreement with the post office and saved us over $50 million and the post office over $20 million in how we went about doing business with them. And that set the road for Capital One to view the world outside of Capital One as truly possible, and got my group, procurement, supply chain, involved in things like how do we do mergers and acquisitions better? And how do we actually decide what the company should do internal and external and insourcing and outsourcing projects? And that really did change the dynamic of a company that thought it had to just hire as many people as it can find on earth to, maybe there's a smarter way to grow the company than doing everything ourselves.
You know, one of the things that we see is a part of this design of surprising results is that when you run into the problem, like in your case, we're spending $300 million a year on postage, can we do that more cheaply? You know, that was the presenting problem. You enlarged that question to, could we have a collaborative relationship with the post office? And
Yes.
that's what unlocked it. It wasn't just, can we get them to cut the price? It's, can we generate a collaborative, because nobody else was doing that.
Yeah.
You know, when you first raised the question, a lot of people dismissed it like pipe dreaming. And so that you got people engaged in a bigger question, which is, could we possibly have a collaborative relationship with the post office rather than just somebody who purchases postage? And I think
we had to look at it pretty deeply, because you can imagine you walk around the post office hallway and you walk around the Capital One hallway and you don't see a lot of intersection maybe. So we had to look at it pretty deeply and start to make that intersection. But you know, another thing I've learned from you guys is if you look, there's usually something there you can start with. And we did find that. So.
yeah.
I think there's two elements in that really. One is, I think you questioned what other people said was obvious and couldn't happen, right? So I, through all transparency, worked for Jim at the moment when all of this was happening, and can remember some of the early conversations of people saying, you can't negotiate with the post office, like you all are wasting your time, right? And so there was an obvious thing that was just known to be true and not questioned. Right. And I think the place where we started to question, which I believe is a really important distinction to make here, is that we were looking for people were looking for an intersection at the place of method. Could we get a cheaper rate was a method. And what, Jim, I think we did at the time, and you did so well when you went in and looked at what are the things that the Postmaster General cares about, is we stepped back and said, wait a minute, what are the purposes we're all here to serve? Right, so we really stopped arguing about methods, first class versus third class, rates and bulk rates and timing, and which was really where the conversation had been, and stepped back and said, what are we each trying to accomplish here? And what were the results that we all wanted? And all of a sudden, that's where some of those surprising results came from, is that we had way more in common with them than we imagined, because we had been too busy arguing on the details of how much a stamp costs to simplify it way down.
You know, I liked a comment I just saw from Annalisa Jennings that the right question sets us free. So it's really interesting. If you're enlarging the question, do you notice that it's creating more energy? Which is what just struck me about what Annalisa said, that really it's true that some questions are so petty and puny, they make us small too. Mm. And you've been an artist at asking a question big enough that it's worth us being wholehearted and interested in it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those early triggers you look for, as are you doing things that are freeing people up and truly getting on their side and what they're for frees them up more than criticizing and critiquing and saying no and etc. And again, no has its time and place. But when you're starting to look for possibility and expand, you want to start to join people and start to build and collect from a common reference point, looking at what else is possible to add to our dimensions here and think about.
You know, there's another part of this, Robin, I'm going to come back to you about, which is another part of the design for us. So first, yeah, you have to have something you care about that you don't see the answer to. And the second thing is enlarge the question the way we've just been talking about it. But the third thing is, what's the diverse system of viewpoints you're now going to connect in ways they've never been connected before? And that's a crucial part of then coming up with the insightful path forward. So Robin, I know that you care a lot about that. So say something.
Well, you know, I think in this particular case, Jim, the way you painted it, so we'll just keep playing with this example for a moment, right, is that Capital One at the time was fairly insular, right? They looked internally to find all their answers. They hired really smart people, us included, I guess. But they looked internally. They had a lot of analysts that worked on looking at the data every which way that was possible, they thought. And the notion of including the Postal Service, or at that time, the other work that we were doing was including suppliers into the conversation, was foreign to them, right? Because they were only looking at the things that they thought they could control, and they assumed that everything out there they couldn't do anything about. Right. And so I think a lot of the conversations at the time really were about, if you look at the system that we're involved in and all of the implications of it, right, there actually becomes way more possibilities. One little other piece that I always find so interesting about our Postal Service example is that one of the reasons why we were able to make some of those moves with the Postal Service had nothing to do with mail. Well, it had everything to do with mail, but it actually had to do with return mail, right? Which was not something that we were paying all that much. We were paying attention to it for different reasons, but that was part of expanding the system. It wasn't just about the postage. It was about the entire system of what it takes to actually get stuff in your mailbox that we don't think about. And Capital One wasn't thinking about all the things it took the Postal Service to actually take that envelope and get it to your door, and what happened after that. So that those diverse points of view really come from, how do we enlarge that system?
Yeah, I think that you really said, Jim, something that's demonstrating what Robin's talking about, which is you say 50 million for yourselves at Capital One and 20 million for the Postal Service. And that's because looking at the whole system, we see things you can't see from a part of the system. And that means we need to get whole groups of inputs in that allow us to make each other smarter. It's one, as some of you will know, one of our favorite things to bet our whole practice on is that differences plus trust equal brilliance. So how do you expand the people giving inputs if you want to get surprising results? So you want surprising new connections, because those would be the source of surprising new results.
That's right. And a lot of people don't make those connections because they think it's going to take time or be difficult. And I'd point out kind of Malcolm Gladwell's book about Blink. You really can make these connections very quickly. Obviously, you get a sense of people very quickly, but also figuring out how to look at data, get additional people into the dialogue. You find out pretty quickly things that surprise you. And that to me is part of the game, is to constantly expand those sources of input to the dialogue and conversation.
I think we need to have a point about the fourth element we see as surprising results, which is rapid cycles. So whichever one of you wants to jump in on that, what's a couple minutes about these 30 to 90 day cycles of alignment, action, and adjustment, because we find that's crucial to this effort.
I'm a big believer in quick wins. And I think the whole world's moved to that, right? We used to be in a world that had 5-year plans and, big giant IT releases and things. I think the world's moved away and recognized that rapid adjustment matters. But it's still amazing to me how many people don't take advantage of it because it's always available. I have a rule that we stop meetings 5 minutes early if they're half an hour, or 10 minutes early if they're an hour, and debrief them to get some rapid learning going on versus waiting to the end of the project to produce a binder that sits on the shelf that no one ever talks about. And I think rapidly adjusting, and you can literally do it every word that comes out of your mouth, see new possibilities, but I fundamentally believe that rapid adjustment is the key to producing bigger results faster, because you're constantly staying on course versus going off and then having to come back. Yeah. And I would encourage everybody, besides the quality of connection, if you take something away from this talk, is that debriefing early and often, every meeting, every conversation is critical. And I like to tell my team about the miracle of compound interest. Just think if we got 1% better in every meeting, how much faster that would go. There's an example, I think, in the vitality imperative that you can tip over a little domino and all of a sudden in 29 iterations, you can tip over the Empire State Building. But, that miracle of compound interest is really, really, really critical. And just try to get 1% better in every meeting, every week, and you'd be surprised at what you can do.
I think the other thing is, and this ties to a question I saw that Anne Marie Allen raised about the emotion of making that commitment. I don't have the full question, Emma Rose, if you want to read it out for me. If you can.
Yeah, it's, can you speak to the emotion of committing to and finding surprising results?
Yeah. And so I think that the cycles also help with that, right? Because if we set out to achieve something that's going to be this long, unwieldy, feels like it's way out on the horizon result, I think that can be draining for folks, right? Emotionally, mentally, physically at times, right? And so those cycles actually help us to achieve something, learn something. And hopefully in the learning, I'm going to quote Anne here, is can we follow the joy, right? Which, Jim, I think is your point about fulfillment. Can we look for the places where we actually are seeing the organization get smarter and stronger and have those wins, and what does that tell us about the system, and how does it help us actually get smarter? And so I think that in the shorter cycles, making a commitment to that becomes a whole lot easier. It helps us to build that trust, Nikki, that you were saying, right? Because we have this short cycle, we're able to build some trust and some belief in ourselves and the ability, we're able to learn from it and get smarter as we go. Mick, what else would you add about that?
I'd add a couple things. So one, I would say that, hey, I love to see the results move and see the charts as I talked about, but you have the chance to make a difference every single moment. And to me, the difference you can make in every meeting is to do an appreciation of somebody. And by appreciating somebody and letting them know what they've done to make a contribution, that's a result that, again, will have that multiplier effect. And I think, Mickey, you told me one time, Anne Frank had a great quote, which is how wonderful it is that nobody has to wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. So, so it really is available for all of us, every single interaction, every single meeting, to not only appreciate them, but to actually start improving the world. And I'd again say that's available for everybody on this call just by simply appreciating each other.
Yeah, I think that's a part of the trust building that goes on here, because I think people who are great at these cycles of rapid improvement are great at appreciating small moments of surprising contribution. They're not waiting on that. Somebody who actually just shifted the quality of a moment in the meeting, somebody who brought up a piece of data we weren't thinking of, that every time that happens, it taps into something that's natural for the vast majority of human beings. You don't have to make somebody produce surprising results. We love producing surprising results. So how do you free that native desire to leave things better than we found them, rather than try to dominate people into some imagined idea of what productivity looks like?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The other question I'm curious about, we have just maybe a minute or so for this, is as leaders in organizations, what do we do that actually gets in the way of unleashing that for people? So what are the potholes or the pitfalls that we step into along the way? Mick, I'll actually go, we won't put Jim, since he's our guest, on the spot for that one first. Well, I got a long list. So Mickey, for you, maybe personally, what is it for you personally that you think gets in the way?
Well, some of you know I keep threatening to write a book called The Back Road to Brilliance, which is a list of all the stupid things I've done that I'm promising not to do again. One of them is, the more successful we became, the more I started to get trapped in thinking I already know. And that stops being available to be surprised by what other people see, feel, and think. And so that became an issue later in my career, of having to wake up to that you never finish learning. And I was embarrassed to catch myself being the person who kept returning to what I already know. And finally, with the help of a lot of people around me, like Robin, to keep myself open to being surprised. And that's why, as you know, Judy paraphrased a philosopher, my sister, once, and Judy said that who already knows cannot experience miracles.
Yeah.
So I think that's the lesson for me.
Jim, for you, anything that you would want to say about just what's one on your list that you think gets in the way?
Yeah, and I do think it's important, obviously, to figure out a theme for yourself because it helps you grow and develop faster. And a theme for me, and I saw some folks asking, how do you deal with failure? And I used to always want to be not anywhere near failure, right? I don't want to get in there, run away as fast as I can. Oh, that's messy. Let something go over there. What I've actually found, to Mickey's point, is it's a great opportunity for learning. I think people actually learn more from their failures than they do their successes. And I still have that first reaction tendency to run away from it, but I've really convinced myself and pushed myself to actually lean in. And in that vein of appreciation, there's always something to learn from failure. And if you can turn that learning into something that, again, allows you to improve that 1%, that miracle of compound interest kicks in again. And so I've turned to look at failure as an opportunity to learn and an opportunity to grow and an opportunity to appreciate not only myself, but others for actually that learning, because that's the start of the design as well, as to how to deliver surprising results is learning.
Well, and mine is that I'm overly practical, and in being overly practical, I'm paying attention to time, and we are just about there. So in the spirit of appreciation, I just want to say thank you. We have deep gratitude, both Jim for you being here, Emma Rose for all the hard work you've done in helping us to put these together, and to all of you that have joined us over both today and over the previous weeks. This has been a hoot for all of us. You know, for those of you who started with us, this was an experiment on our end. We have learned a ton. If you have ideas about topics that you'd love us to have a dialogue about in the future, either something to return to that we've talked about, something you'd like us to go deeper on, or a topic related to connection and leadership that we maybe just didn't get a chance to, we'd love to hear from you. Our newsletter is going to go bi-weekly. Emma Rose will be sending out the recording for this, so you'll be able to see that and join us in the future. So thanks again, everybody, for joining us. Jim, thanks for being here. Mickey, it's always a pleasure to spend some time with you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.